Humans have been known to be morbidly curious. When something horrible happens, we tend to switch all our focus on the tragedy rather than moving on. Call it sympathy, empathy, or just plain curiosity, tragedies or accidents grab our attention naturally, and even more when the cause of said tragedy remains unknown. This is where detective fiction takes its first step into the mainstream. I'm sure we're all familiar with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous work, Sherlock Holmes. You might not have read the books, and I don't blame you. I mean, have you seen how thick it is? But you must have at least heard of the series, right? An unbelievably smart and clever detective, and his lackey, Watson, investigating and solving cases in the most detailed way possible. It's this work of fiction that likely inspired most detective-based works like Nancy Drew, Hardy Boys, and tons more. And obviously anime and manga, and also hentai, are no exception. With dozens of mystery series out there, it's hard to keep track of each of them. Heck, Spring 2018 has Leighton Mystery Agency, Doreiku, and Devil's Line. But among the plethora of titles, one series stands out the most, at least in terms of narrative structure and dark atmosphere. The File of Young Kindaichi. What, you thought I was gonna say Detective Conan? Well, while I admit that the latter is more popular than the former, they both have aspects that make them completely different. And no, I'm not saying that one copied the other. While Kindaichi was published 3 years before Conan, Aoyama, or the author of Detective Conan, used a modern take on the series and made it his own. But I'm not here to compare both series. Rather, I wanted to talk about Kindaichi as a whole, how it grasped the audience's attention, and how it took a dark take on detective fiction. A little side note. This video will focus on the first arc of the first series, i.e. episodes 1 and 3, so there's really no need for a spoiler alert. But if you really want to understand my points, then I suggest you watch the first 3 episodes on Animax. Not sponsored, by the way, it's just where I watched the whole season. Another reason why I chose the earliest episodes, other than to avoid spoilers, is because it's part in the entire show that really made an impact. The one that really made a name for itself. So without further ado, let's begin. In the beginning of the episode, we see a student walking around school at night, when he suddenly stumbles upon a dead body, and then disappears. And then, as we are shown a brief preview of the school, we hear students chatting about how it was but one of the 7 mysteries of Fudo High. As an intro, it's pretty mundane, but the way they introduced it made it sound like you were about to watch a horror movie rather than a mystery series. A few seconds later, we are introduced to Kindaichi, a spunky, playful student, and her obligatory childhood friend, Miyuki. We see some interaction between the two when they're cut off by this beautiful lady who happened to be their senior, Sakuragi. It's here that Sakuragi convinces Kindaichi to solve the infamous 7 mysteries of Fudo High. He and Miyuki then visit their club room to see an arrogant brat, a fat guy, a girl with glasses, and a weirdo with a camera. But again, the way they were introduced made them look suspicious, with the fat guy inconspicuously trying to break a pencil and the girl always wearing a glove. From here, we can see how the pieces for a case was subtly taking shape. In the next scene, we see the club members trying to solve a puzzle, to which Kindaichi easily solves. It's here that the entire cast learns of Kindaichi's true identity, the grandfather of the great detective. Yep, it's not a self-introduction or a surprise reveal. It's seen as something amazing but not rare, giving the impression that he's more than meets the eye. Then a letter was sent to the principal. Then little but valuable objects are shown to us audience and the relationship of each club member is presented. And all of a sudden, these supernatural events happen around Sakuragi, and she somehow solves the 7 mysteries. But as she was about to deliver the message to Kindaichi, the unexpected happens. So he and Miyuki decide to go to school that night to investigate why their senpai suddenly called. The club members regroup with the security guard and talk about some riddle or something, I don't really remember. Then as Kindaichi and the guard stroll around a bit, we see the first case file in action. A ritual on the other side of the building, a masked man, a locked room, and a disappearance. The sequence of each event left them in awe, especially Kindaichi. It was a case which was yet to be solved. The next day, Kindaichi arrived in school only to be welcomed by a horrible tragedy. The senpai whom he admired hung herself in the previously locked room. It is in this very scene that we realize that was unexpected. A character who was surely going to be a key figure in the series died, just like that. It's here that we see that the characters are vulnerable, whoever they might be. Even the most prominent characters can be a potential victim of death. And Sakuragi's death became the drive for Kindaichi to solve the case, in the name of his grandfather. The first episode alone was enough to tell you that this won't be your typical detective anime, because there will always be death on the scene. And in the second episode, we are convinced that all the occurrences were more than just supernatural. The case is revisited and discussed with the police force, trying to solve how the victim escaped the locked room and such. It was also revealed how the 7 mysteries came to be. Then more evidences are presented, more murders in display, and more questions left unanswered. Past key items were reviewed and used to solve a small part of the case. But even then, the tragedies wouldn't end. And again, we are shown that everyone is vulnerable when Miyuki became the victim, leaving the impression that unless the mystery is solved and the suspect is caught, people will keep becoming victims. And perhaps even Kindaichi. The third episode is where it all comes together. All the evidences were tied together and Kindaichi revealed who the criminal was by acting as the killer and showing how the murders were done step by step rather than just explaining how it was done. And when the suspect was finally revealed, guess what? He was killed by the parent of the victim. And there was nothing but despair afterwards. Of course, everything went back to normal eventually, and everyone finally went back to their normal lives, thus ending the case of the 7 Mysteries murder. A lot of points can be discussed in this one arc, but to stick with tradition, let's focus on only 3. For one, the students involved with the case were potential victims, and the very fact that Kindaichi was also a student gave him no invulnerability to the fact that he could also be a victim, telling us that this was no ordinary case in anime, that no one was safe. Unlike most detective stories, the characters were present during the crime, meaning that the audience saw everything in the MC's perspective, and so we were just as confused as everyone in the cast. We all saw the key items, the evidences, the codes. It was all laid out for us. We also take part in solving the mystery, giving this certain interaction between the show and the audience. Also, everyone involved during that crime knew something happened judging from their reactions and alibis. And through the subtle images and acts in certain scenes, we are given more information than the characters and yet still remain oblivious as to who caused it all. And even after the criminal was revealed, we saw that the crime was not done because of evil intentions, but because of flawed reasoning. The criminal didn't kill anyone because he hated them or anything, but because he wanted to keep certain information a secret as much as possible, and ended up murdering someone by accident. He didn't kill to forget about his mistake. He killed because he knew his mistake, and he was only trying to cover that up. Now, I'd love to go in depth with this by adding additional information, but that's a pain in the ass. Luckily, all you need to know about detective fiction and how Kindaichi fulfills every role has already been explained 90 years ago. through SS Van Dyne's 20 Commandments for Writing Detective Stories. Okay, this is pretty lengthy, so I'll just give the short version while showing a picture of anime waifus for no apparent reason, give a checkmark for those that Kindaichi fulfilled, and give a brief explanation of how it did it. The reader must have equal opportunity with the detective for solving the mystery. We've already explained how all the key items and evidences were already shown for us so that we could solve it with Kindaichi. No willful tricks or deceptions may be placed on the reader other than those played legitimately by the criminal on the detective himself. We can already clearly see that there was nothing that was left in the case that wasn't used. There must be no love interest. Okay, this is kind of an exception because Miyuki and Kindaichi's love relationships doesn't really show up until later in the series, so we can pretty much just slide that away. The detective himself, or one of the official investigators, should never turn out to be the culprit. Now, this is pretty much obvious because Kindaichi was more of a victim who was trying to help out other people than really become the culprit. The culprit must be determined by logical deductions, not by accident or coincidence or unmotivated confession. As we saw, there was no cheating or anything, it was all purely on how Kindaichi solved the mystery. Through, normal means like decrypting the code or how this was used as a murder weapon. The detective novel or series, whatever, must have a detective in it, and a detective is not a detective unless he detects. That's pretty self-explanatory, I'm not gonna explain that anymore. There simply must be a corpse in a detective novel, and the deader the corpse, the better. As painful as this might sound, it's true, this applied to Kindaichi, and I don't even know. My waifu, why did he die? The problem of the crime must be solved by strictly naturalistic means. Well, it was pretty natural how Kindaichi solved it. Once he was able to solve and decrypt the code, he reenacted the crime itself, explaining everything that happened and pretty much very natural. There must be but one detective, that is, but one protagonist of deduction, one deus ex machina. Well, yeah, Kindaichi is already the deus ex machina, considering that he didn't die the whole thing, which is kind of lucky, I guess, or a miracle, I don't really know, but that clicks out. The culprit must turn out to be a person who has played a more or less prominent part in the story. Well, the principal did play a prominent part, seeing that he was the one who received the letter, and pretty much everything surrounds him. What is wrong with my language today? A servant must not be chosen by the author as the culprit. Well, unlike the first arc, there wasn't really a servant, but on the other arcs, it is true, there was no servant as the culprit, so that pretty much checks out. There must be but one culprit, no matter how murders are committed. Well, there really was just one culprit in the end, and there was just a lot of fillers, I guess, that happened, but there was only one culprit. Secret societies, camoras, mafias, etc. have no place in a detective story. While all of these secret societies or the rituals were kind of like elements in the story, they weren't really the focus, so it really had no place in the detective story, and so did in Kindaichi. If there was, it was usually just fake societies, and they had to debunk it just to solve the mystery, so that checks out. The method of murder and the means of detecting it must be rational and scientific. Yes, remember that Kindaichi thought that everything was supernatural. Actually, it's not just Kindaichi, everyone in the school. But Kindaichi managed to solve it through scientific and logical means, so this also checks out. The truth of the problem must at all times be apparent, provided the reader is shrewd enough to see it. Yeah, the truth of the problem is that a lot of people die because of that 7th mystery, so that's also okay. A detective novel or series should contain no long descriptive passages, no literary dallying with side issues, no subtly worked out character analysis, no atmospheric preoccupation. Such matters have no vital place in a record of crime and deduction. This one, I can kind of give a leeway to the filler scenes because that was kind of vital to the plot, so yeah, this also checks out. A professional criminal must never be shouldered with the guilt of a crime in a detective story. Take note, a professional criminal. The principal was not a professional criminal, so this doesn't really make any sense. I guess this also checks out? A crime in a detective story must never turn out to be an accident or a suicide. It didn't turn out to be an accident or a suicide. Well, kind of the contrary happened, so yeah. The motives for all criminals in detective stories should be personal. International plottings and war politics be learned in the different category of fiction. Now, we don't really get other things than, well, the police and that, but other than that, it was pretty much just about the case, and that's what Kindaichi got, so that's also checked out. And to give my credo to an even score of items, I herewith list a few of the advices. You can pretty much just read that and put in the comment section what you think, if it was there in Kindaichi or not, because I am now reading all of that. And there you go, Kindaichi pretty much got all of those in the bag. I also suggest reading Raymond Chandler's 10 Commandments for the detective novel. And don't worry, it's not as lengthy, it's easier to understand, and it works as the basis of most detective fiction. To sum it all up, the file of young Kindaichi not only fulfilled every factor that make for a good detective fiction, but also bring a darker and more interactive twist to the genre. It wasn't afraid to permanently kill important characters, even if she's hot, and goes out to create a name of its own, inspiring many mystery series in the process. And that is how it grasped the audience's attention, and how it took a dark take on detective fiction. Whew, that was a long rant. I actually wanted to make a video about Kindaichi a long time ago, but I never really got to it because of YouTube. But finally I got through it, and it was a really fun time waking up. Wake me up inside. What am I saying? Anyway, it was really fun making this video, and I hope you learned something. I hope you learned a thing or two, and if you did, leave a like and also subscribe down there for more videos like this. As always, this is vanilla. Not the flavor, but just as sweet.